Hi, welcome back to Space Thoughts. This week's presentation, this week's video is going to we're going to talk about norms again, and we talked about those briefly during the MEV video that I did a couple weeks ago, and actually it involves some similar activities, but this one involves a Russian inspection satellite that was launched on November 25th, 2019. Kosmos 2542, which is a designation the satellite was given by the Russian Federation, has since January and February maneuvered close to a U.S. intelligence gathering satellite, USA 245, and U.S. officials are a little bit worried about what it's actually doing there. Probably one of the things is actually taking photos and actually inspecting the this intelligence gathering satellite. Now, reportedly, USA 245 is a KH-11 satellite, but the USA designation doesn't say that. It's kind of generic designator for national security satellites, as is the Kosmos series of satellites. And that's something the Russians have done and the Soviets have done. And of course, the U.S. has used the USA designator for its national security satellites that it doesn't want to reveal too much information about. So what's the problem here? The problem is we have a satellite that's come probably within a couple hundred miles of this intelligence gathering satellite, which is a very sensitive satellite. Very little is known about it publicly, and basically, understandably, the U.S. government is hesitant to give information about it out to the general public. What is known is through open source and hypothetical and research of open sources. But other than that, right now it looks like it's just getting some, a good close-eye inspection of the intelligence gathering satellite. And technically it's intelligence gathering satellite in and of itself. The question is, and what the U.S. government appears to be concerned about, is this kind of using this satellite on top of inspection, also using it for what we call rendezvous for a co-orbital ASAT. Now, I'm not saying Kosmos 2542 is an ASAT. Please be clear about that. What I'm saying is the Russian Federation may be using this satellite not only to inspect this satellite, but to see how close to practice, maybe dress rehearsal for a future spacecraft that may actually be a co-orbital ASAT. Now, this isn't about precedent, because during the Cold War, the Russian Federation, or then the Soviet Union, developed a co-orbital ASAT, and this is a picture of it right here in a museum, actually a model of one of them. And it was actually a system that was designed to be launched on demand. If they decided in the event of hostilities or pre-hostilities, they wanted to destroy certain satellites, they would launch these on rockets, it would rendezvous with the satellite and detonate. They really tested this system extensively, and in fact, after testing them, they detonated them in orbit. In fact, the debris created in low Earth orbit is actually still a problem today, because the International Space Station routinely has to be concerned about debris from these quote killer satellite tests, and sometimes it even has to make maneuvers to dodge it. So it's kind of it was kind of a problem back then, but now the debris from it is still a continuing problem. That system was deactivated, I believe, in the 1980s. I think around 1986, but who knows whether it's mothballed. However, with this new interest in satellite inspection by really the United States, China, and the Russian Federation, it opens up the possibility of a whole new realm of co-orbital ASATs. So, what's the problem? The problem is, the question is, what is the intent of the Russian Federation at this point with this satellite? This is concerning to U.S. officials, and they're understandably uncomfortable about this thing getting very close. But the larger question for me, and other legal scholars, or people who are involved in space law and policy, is this creating a norm of behavior? And remember when I talked about norms a couple weeks ago with the Northrop Grumman MEV, and how the fact that it performed that activity and no nations complained about it, and kind of in my opinion, started the beginnings of a norm or an acceptable standard of behavior in orbit. In the same way, Kosmos 2542 could be argued potentially trying to do this as well. In other words, what the Russians, one of the end games of the Russians might be to see if there would be any pushback by the United States by maneuvering so close to such an important satellite. And the trap here is if you don't object to a behavior and you repeat it, it starts to get solidified and starts becoming accepted. So even though the rule isn't written down, in formal practice, it becomes accepted. And we call that customary international law. That's a very rudimentary definition of what customary international law is. I explained a couple weeks ago during the in the MEV video that if no nations actually objected to this and these activities are repeated and continue, it could actually establish a norm or standard of behavior that's accepted, i.e. satellite servicing. Now, fortunately, the U.S. government has been, like I said, concerned about it, and they have pushed back. They've made multiple inquiries to the Russian Federation through diplomatic channels, but they've all been ignored. So a couple weeks ago, there was actually a public announcement. They publicly, denounced this activity in so many words, saying it was unacceptable and they were uncomfortable with it. So if the end game of the Russians is to try and establish a norm or see how far they can go to push the United States to provoke a response, then I think the U.S. coming out and explaining that, we don't like this, even if it's publicly, even if the diplomatic organs of the Russian Federation don't respond, I think that's enough to break off the chain of events that would lead this to becoming an accepted norm of activity. Now, I've had a renewed interest in this. I've followed this for a little while, but renewed interest because Jane's Defense actually interviewed me last week, and they asked me about this. And one of their questions is, how do you define hostile intent in outer space? And that, and that's a very good question. Just because space is so new and so, how can you say, absent of actual hard rules, it's hard to define what is a hostile activity and what isn't. The question is an inspection by a satellite like Kosmos 2542 of another state satellite, is that, how can you say, is that a hostile behavior? Maybe not. I mean, inspecting it certainly isn't because you have free access. However, if it gets to the point, however, it starts doing maneuvers that looks like it's going to interfere with a satellite, it could develop a standard, or how can you say, a model for what hostile intent would be, or what would trigger a decision that this is a hostile intent and hence a reaction. So this is why things like this get very tricky. There are no hard line rules about what really makes a hostile intent in outer space, or at least none that we know about, none that are actual policy in the U.S. government, in the Department of Defense in general. So we don't know. There may be certain triggers that people are looking for, and if there aren't, I'm sure this is something that the U.S. government and the U.S. policy organs are looking at and kind of speculating on, and actually maybe even having dialogue with countries like the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China. So the big takeaway I want you to get from this is, one, the Cosmos 2542 is concerning. It could have established a norm, but there's been significant U.S. pushback against the activity, and sufficient concern raised that it probably cuts off the ability to create a norm for this type of behavior. Now, another reason, probably on top of gathering intelligence, seeing what kind of norms could be the U.S. would allow, or how far the U.S. could be pushed. This could just be, a way to rattle the U.S. and poke us in the side or in the back. Just to annoy and irritate us. Believe it or not, that's what countries do. It's part of the grand game of geopolitics. And aside from all the hard military power posturing and such, sometimes they do things like this just to poke other nations and irritate them. The problem is, in areas that are vacuous as space law right now, at this point, poking a little bit too hard in the wrong way could trigger a bad action. And that goes for any actions in outer space, whether it's performed by the United States, the Russian Federation, or the People's Republic of China, or any other nation that performs space activities in outer space. So that's a quick and dirty explanation of one of my concerns that I've been kind of focusing on last week. And again, that was triggered by that inquiry by Jane's Defense. But again, I hope I'll keep rolling these videos off, and in future videos you're going to be hearing more from me about norms and customary international law, because this is really the means by which outer space law is going to be developed in the future. I mean, the era of treaties has come, and I think it's gone for quite a while, just because Nature treaties, they take too long to develop, and once you get them, they're too easy to interpret to your advantage and outright ignore. So again, I'll be talking a lot more in the future videos about custom and norms. These are terms you're going to hear more often. So until my next video, have a great day.